Thanks for joining us. I am Sophie Dietrich, the HR professional for the Compliance Center here at Wagner, Felkner and Judd. Our team is dedicated to supporting all of you with your human resource and employment law questions. So we're glad to have you with us today. Quick housekeeping stuff before we get started. As normal, please send your questions to us via the chat option at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will answer questions as they come in. Also, so you're aware, the webinar is being recorded. So, we want to share with everyone who can't join with us today. So if you do want a link to rewatch it later, just reach out. And with those items covered, let me introduce you to our presenter, Janelle Stanton. Janelle is a senior associate with the employment law team here at Wagner, Felkner and Judd. She brings 9 years of employment law and business litigation experience to our team, and she dedicates much of her practice to counseling business leaders such as yourself on maintaining compliance with all of these laws that we're subject to. So she is a great thought leader. We love learning from her, and we're very excited to have her with us today. So thank you everyone for joining. And with that, I'll hand things over to Janelle.
All right. Thank you so much, Sophie. We also, I believe, are fortunate today to be joined by Bill Cade, who is a senior HCM consultant. He is going to show us the iSolve system and how you guys can set up the accruals and sort of deal with the administration component of ESST. Bill has more than 30 years of experience of serving clients. He's been a team member at Asset HR since 2005. He has a breadth of knowledge in account management, HRMS systems, payroll administration, as well as benefits administration. So hopefully we're going to be joined by him as well today. But today what we wanted to talk to you all about is some of those frequently asked questions about Minnesota's Earned Sick and Safe Time law. I did a presentation last year around the time that the law was passed, and it was a very general kind of overview. But since this law's passage, our team has fielded many of the same questions from our clients. And so we thought, in order to sort of provide more service, give you guys kind of a more of a proactive approach to this, we thought, let's just take all of these frequently asked questions that we're receiving and answer them in a live webinar session. So like Sophie said, if you have a question that's not covered here, you can go ahead and throw that in the Q&A panel or Q&A box on the webinar panel. We will try to get to that. I don't anticipate that we're going to use up the full hour, but that does kind of depend on how many questions you all have. And if you really give me a humdinger, I might tell you, hey, I'm going to take that one offline and research that for you. Because this is a newer law, us attorneys, we like to think we're legal encyclopedias, but we're not always. And so sometimes we need some time to mull over a question that you might pose to us. So if I don't get to your question, rest assured I will research it and I have somebody from our team get back to you on that. But just so you know, I have the FAQs here in my hand, and it's lengthy. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into the content. And like I said, put those questions in that chat box if you've got them. So one of the questions, again, that we get quite frequently is, when it says an employee accrues 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, does that mean we can have it accrue on actual hours worked and not include vacation hours, holiday pay, or sick pay? And that is the case. So the law of the statute is actually that ESST hours accrue 1 hour for every hour worked. That is the operative term. So if an employee is out on vacation or some other type of leave and they're not working, if they got holiday pay, something like that, ESST hours are not going to accrue when an employee is not working. But And this is not what this question is asking, but because I know you guys are all super whip smart, you're going to come up with this question anyway. So I thought I'd get out ahead of it and answer it for you straight away. Because ESST accrues for all hours worked, that means that ESST has to accrue when an employee is working overtime hours. So if you have a non-exempt employee that works 50 hours in a week and you're using the accrual method, they are going to accrue 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. So they're going to get 1 point whatever the math is, almost 2 hours of ESST for that particular week. Of course, that is not the case if the employee is exempt from earning overtime under one of the exemptions like the professional, administrative, or executive employee exemption. So again, the big thing to remember, and the operative term is for hours worked. So if the employee is not working, they're not accruing ESST. This one I was kind of surprised by, but it gave a lot of people some heartburn. So what if an employee does not work enough hours in the year to earn 48 hours of leave? Because of course you might have employees that are very, very part-time. You might have some seasonal employees, and you know that if you have seasonal employees, they are eligible to accrue ESST just like your regular full-time employees are. So if you're using the accrual method and you have somebody who's part-time or seasonal, it is possible that that employee will not earn the full 48 hours in a year. And that's perfectly fine, because what the statute says is that they're allowed to accrue up to 48 hours. So as long as your accrual is providing at least 1 hour of ESST for every 30 hours worked, up to that 48 hour in a year maximum, then your company is going to be in compliance. And of course, you might be using one of the front loading methods, and this might not apply at all. So, but I just want to make very, very, very clear that it is okay if they don't accrue that much, as long as they are accruing at least the minimum amount required by the ESST statute. But this is actually interesting, because this is one of the questions that our team really thought long and hard about, is what if an employee starts in the middle of the year or toward the end of the year? Does their calendar year run from their start date? And the calendar year does run from the employee's start date through the end of that year. What can happen is this can become problematic for employers that are using one of the front loading methods. So if you have opted to front load 48 hours or 80 hours to your employees, then you have an employee start in November. Technically, you are required to front load all of that 48 or 80 hours to that employee who just started working for you. And that's because one of the FAQs that we got from the Minnesota Department of Labor stated that the ESST law does not authorize prorating any front-loaded hours. And again, this is something our team internally, we had many spirited conversations about, is prorating okay? Is it not? And the original round of FAQs that we got from the Department of Labor did not clarify. And we actually wrote in questions to the Department of Labor asking them to please clarify this, and they finally did. But they did come out and say that that prorating front-loaded hours is not permissible. So that leaves you kind of wondering, well, what are we going to do? We want to use the front-loading method. And so if you want to use one of the front-loaded methods, what you can do is you can use the accrual method in the first year of employment, and then just pay out whatever is accrued but unused at the end of the year, and start them on the upfront grant, the front-loaded method, in their next year of employment for your company. So that is perfectly permissible to do. You can make that switch. But again, as long as you are switching to that front-loaded system and you're paying out whatever is accrued. So you can certainly do that. That is permissible. The Department of Labor has also blessed that. Another question we got a lot is ESST carried over, is ESST carryover of any unused time up to 80 hours required across the board? And the answer to that is no. So if you opt to do one of the front-loaded methods of ESST, you do not have to allow an employee to carry over from one year to the next. But if you use the accrual method where they accrue 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, then you are going to need to allow the employee to carry over up to 80 hours of leave. And you might be thinking, Janelle, you just told me it's up to 48 hours in a year, and that is correct. So an employee can accrue up to 48 hours in the first year, and if they don't use any, well, of course, in year 2, they're going to continue accruing time off. And so their balance could go all the way up to 80 hours, and they would be required to keep that 80-hour balance and use that time that they have banked up, but they can carry over up to those 80 hours of leave from one year to the next. So I thought this might be helpful because this still seems to be one of the areas that is really kind of confusing, because unlike most other states that gave 2 options, either an accrual option or a front-loaded option, Minnesota went ahead and made 3 options for employers. And whether you have to allow for carryover or payout depends on which method you choose. So the law, one of the questions we get, the law also says we have to pay out the remaining balance at the end of the year. So which is it? Carryover or payout? And you'll love this. The answer is, of course, it depends. So if you opt to use the accrual method, where they accrue 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, you are required to allow them to carry over up to 80 hours of ESST from one year to the next. If you front load either 48 or 80 hours, the benefit of both of these is that you don't have to do the carryover. However, if you only front load 48 hours, you have to pay out the unused balance at the end of the year. And that's calendar year, fiscal year, anniversary year, whatever year you have opted to use. It has to be paid out. So if an employee has accrued 48 hours, were front loaded 48 hours, and they only used 8 hours of ESST in the year, then you have to pay out 40 hours of that unused balance at the end of the year. That's required. If you front load 80, the benefit here is that there's no carryover and there's no payout required. And so this was kind of, I think, probably a little carrot dangled in front of employers to say, see if you'll give them just a little bit more time, you don't have to monkey with carryover or payout. So the benefit in front loading 80 hours is there's no carryover required and no payout of the unused portion that's due at the end of the year. And I've also had a number of clients ask me, well, okay, but can we opt to pay it out? So let's say, or carry it over. So let's say you front load 48 hours and you want to give employees the option to either get paid out or carry over that time. And the position I'm going to take on this is it's more employee friendly than you have to be if you're giving them the choice to be paid out or carry it over. So that I believe to be a permissible thing to do. So if you want to give the option when you front load 48 hours, I think that's perfectly fine. And again, if you are being more employee friendly than what the law requires, that's probably fine, because even though you might front load 80 hours and you're not required to allow a carryover, maybe your company wants to allow for a carryover. That's great. You just can't do less than what the earned sick and safe time law requires. So you got to do at least the minimum. You can always do more. You cannot do less. So hopefully this is a helpful visual for the three options for how you're setting this up. And saying there's three options is sort of a misnomer. There's about a million different ways you could set this up that would be perfectly legally compliant. It's just that these are the three permissible methods that were spelled out in the statute. All right, so we've been getting, again, lots of questions about the usage. So if an employee misses a day because his wife was in a traffic accident, can he use ESST? When can ESST be used? So what the statute says here is an employee can use ESST for the diagnosis, care, or treatment of a mental or physical illness, injury, or health condition, including preventive care for an employee or an employee's family member, which includes an employee's spouse or domestic partner. And we got to look really closely at the language here. So if she was in a minor traffic accident, was just shaken up and needed to go home and just sort of relax on the couch with some Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, which I would understand, that might not qualify him for ESST because there needs to be a diagnosis, some type of care, treatment of an injury for ESST to apply. So potentially, yes, the employee can use ESST for this. Now, one of your issues is always going to become, and I think I'm going to probably jump the gun on one of our later FAQs, is you cannot ask for justification of the use of ESST until the employee has used more than 3 consecutive days of time off for an ESST qualifying reason. So if this particular employee here was gone Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, by the time Thursday rolled around, you as the employer could now ask for some kind of documentation justifying that the employee was using ESST for a permissible reason. And if this guy's wife has just been hanging around the house watching Real Housewives for 3 days because she was in a minor traffic accident and never sought care, well, then potentially, you can deny the ESST and possibly ding that person on their attendance, depending on a host of different factors. But that is one kind of nuance there in the law. Okay. All right. I would say that if you ask my team, what's the most common question you get that is totally misunderstood or comment is, hey, my PTO policy meets the ESST requirements. Does this mean we're good? And most of the time, what the client is talking about is they give the amount of PTO that's required by the statute. So maybe they already give every employee 80 hours of PTO. So they think my accrual's in good shape, I'm good to go. And the unfortunate thing, and what I think is probably likely to happen with litigation is going to be about PTO policies. Now, it is perfectly acceptable per the Minnesota ESST law to have a PTO policy, provided that that PTO policy complies with all other components of the ESST law. Where employers' PTO policies go wrong are on things like eligibility. Before ESST, you could make employees wait 90 days, for example, before they were eligible to start using PTO time. That's no longer permissible under the ESST rules. You have to allow the use after 80 hours of work in a calendar year. So you can't make employees wait 90 days anymore. Also, many PTO policies only define an eligible employee as somebody who's full-time. Well, part-time, seasonal, temp, all of those types of employees are required to be able to accrue ESST. That means that all of those employees have to be able to get your PTO, because if you're going to lump ESST into one PTO policy, then you've got to apply all of those ESST requirements or rules to your PTO policy. Sorry, I don't know why I'm losing my voice, but let me see. I got water here too. Let me try that. Another issue with PTO policies are the notice provisions. I have seen several PTO policies where they say that PTO requests are awarded or denied on a first come, first served basis. No, you can't do that anymore, because employees have a legally protected right to use ESST at any time. So if somebody is sick today and they call in today, but you have 4 other employees out on vacation and you can't spare a fit, there's really not much you can do about it at all. So you have to be careful about that first come, first serve, requiring more than 7 days notice, because ESST, you can only require 7 days of notice, nothing more. So I see lots of policies that say you have to give 2 weeks notice in order to use PTO. You also have to be very, very careful about discipline. There are strong anti-retaliation provisions in the ESST law. And so if you cannot use an ESST qualifying absence to discipline somebody under an attendance policy. So you've got to be very, very careful if you're going to discipline somebody for abuse of a PTO policy, that you're not disciplining them for using PTO for protected ESST. So all of these things are sort of not contemplated by companies when they're thinking about how they're going to comply with this law. And for many companies, PTO probably doesn't make sense. And it might be best to separate your PTO into one vacation policy and one sick and safe time policy. And this is especially true if you're an organization that has moments of feast and famine. You know, if you want to try to limit the use of vacation during a busy season or things like that. So something to be very, very, very careful with. Oh, I see I've got a whole bunch of questions. Let me peruse these here quickly. Will the slides be available to attendees? Yes, good question. That's an easy one. Thanks for the softball. Okay, so it says if you front load 80 hours, should you not be able to prorate the hours? Oh wait, hold on. It's on the calendar year. Yeah, should you not be able to prorate the hours the first year based on the employee's anniversary date? That actually works out to more generous than the 48 accrual or 48 front load, correct? And so if you use one of the front-loaded methods, you cannot prorate it. That is not permissible in the statute. Minnesota did something that other states did not do. Most other states allow you to prorate when you have a mid-year start. Minnesota's law does not allow that. So the way around, again, is to use the accrual method in that first year, allow them to accrue 1 hour for every 30 hours worked up to the maximum of 48 hours, and then pay out what is left at the end of that first year, and then just start over with the front load. I know it's tough, but yes, this is just unfortunately the way that Minnesota's done this. Yep, and to clarify, so the first 3 days does not require a note for ESST, but after day 4, we can ask for a note. It's actually after day 3. So it has to be more than 3 consecutive days is what the statute says. So like I said, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. On Thursday, you can ask for documentation that the employee has used ESST for a qualifying purpose. So this is a good question too. Could you not stipulate that employees can use their time for ESST after 80 hours worked and for PTO after a 90-day probationary period? And I mean, you could do that. You could say that if you have a PTO policy, you could say that PTO for sick and safe time reasons, it may be used after you've worked for 80 hours. And PTO to be used for vacation and personal days is you're able to use that after a 90-day probationary period. You could do that. My only concern is to make sure that you know without a doubt the reason that the employee has used PTO. So you've got to be able to capture when an employee says, I'm using PTO for vacation, I'm using PTO for a personal day, I'm using PTO because I'm a victim of domestic violence and I need to go to court and get an OFP. You better know for sure what the use of leave is. And again, so setting up a way for the employee to request PTO for vacation, to request PTO for personal days, to request PTO for sick or safe, whatever. That would become really, really important if you want to do something like that. It's also really important if you want to even have a chance at disciplining an employee for abusive PTO. You've got to be 100% sure that that you're not disciplining that employee for PTO that was taken for an earned sick and safe reason. And if you think about some of these things from just a practical perspective, the entire purpose of earned sick and safe time is to give employees a legally protected right to have time off when they're sick, when they're injured, when their family member is sick or injured, or, experiences one of the qualifying reasons under the statute. So you can't really monkey with that. It's now a legally protected right in Minnesota. So it's just something to be very careful of. Sorry about that. But these are great questions. Keep them coming. Here's another one. If an employee has an existing more generous PTO policy, can they blend it to add the provisions of ESST? Yes. For example, can they say vacation time needs a greater notice and is first come, first serve? But if they want to use time off for ESST, then follow the statute. For foreseeable, 7 days, and unforeseeable. Yes, you can certainly do that. I have set up, excuse me, I'm sorry. I have set up many PTO policies for clients in the last 6-7 months that do just that, that say that PTO for vacation requires 2 weeks of notice and is first come, first serve. Vacation or PTO for sick is, 7 days if the need is foreseeable, and unforeseeable as soon as possible. Again, what you're needing to be careful for is you need to make sure that you can capture the reason that the employee is using your PTO. So that becomes very, very critical if you're going to continue maintaining a PTO policy in the future. All right, I think we have done that FAQ justice. So let's move on, but go ahead and keep putting those questions in the chat and Q&A. This is great. Our current PTO policy states that employees must be employed for 90 days before they can use their PTO. Do we have to change this? And the answer is yes. We've covered this ad nauseum. And for that PTO policy, you don't have to change it for everything, but you would need to spell out PTO for vacation, PTO for sick. So this was a good question, I thought, because it does sort of feel a little nuanced. Can an employer make an employee wait until they have worked 80 hours and become an employee before they can use their accrued ESST, or is it available right away? So here there's a difference between accrual and use. ESST has to begin to be the accrual has to begin immediately, as soon as the employee starts working for the employer. However, the ESST law defines an employee as any person who works at least 80 hours per year in Minnesota. So they're not technically an employee until they've worked for 80 hours. So they're not technically capable of using leave until that time. So yes, they have to begin accruing it. They're going to get, like 2 hours and some change in 80 hours that would become available to them in that time frame. But you can have them wait until they've been employed for 80 hours to actually use the earned sick and safe time. All right, sorry, I know this one hurts a lot of people in the wallet and is concerning to many, but we are still getting this question, so I wanted to bring it up. Does this apply to all employers, including those under 50 employees? And the answer is yes. Could Minnesota have made a small employer exception that, if you have less than 20 employees, this doesn't apply. If you have less than 30, 50, whatever, yes, they could have, and they opted not to. ESST applies to all employers with at least one employee in Minnesota. The only exception is the federal government. So it's a very tiny, tiny, tiny exception in the law. And so this means if you have one legal assistant at your law firm, if you have one other associate at your place of business, this law applies to you. If you employ a nanny for your children, this law applies to you. It's very, very broad. So there's not a small employer exception. I know this one's tough, but it is the way that Minnesota opted to handle this law. All right, so can an employer treat part-time and full-time employees differently, including by giving them different accruals? And the answer here is yeah, you certainly can. So you could have your full-time employees on a front load method. You could put your part-time employees on the accrual method, and that would be perfectly fine, as long as you are making sure that you're not discriminating against an employee or group of employees based on protected class. So what does that mean? Okay, if all of your full-time employees are white women and all of your part-time employees are Black men, and you are going to set up the ESST to do, give full-time employees 80 hours and part-time employees the accrual of 48, this could become a big issue. So you've got to make sure that the different schemes do not have a disparate impact on folks based on that protected class status. So generally, yes, you can do this as long as you ensure that there isn't a discriminatory effect on people based on protected class status. So I have set up many, many, many of these. It's very easy to do, but you would want to, that's just one caveat to that. All right, so are we required to pay out ESST at termination from employment? It is not required by the ESST law. It is permissible. So if you want to be a more, a friendly, employee-friendly employer and you want to pay it out, you certainly can do that. If you want to pay out when the quit is voluntary versus involuntary, that is fine as well, as long as you define that carefully. Now, if you have a PTO policy and you pay out PTO, I would say that, this is lumped in then, and you're pretty much paying out ESST, if you're going to put ESST into your PTO policy, but it's not technically required. If an employee transfers positions or work units within a single employer, they are required to retain their accrued ESST. So you can't start them over, just because they're transferring within your company. And then if an employee returns to work for your company within 180 days of separation, that employee is entitled to have their ESST hours that they had accrued before leaving restored. The exception to that is if you have voluntarily elected to pay out that accrued but unused balance when the employee left. So if you do opt to pay out, you do not have to restore that employee's previous balance. They were paid for it. So that is one kind of little nuance there that I thought was worth cleaning out. I already touched on this, but can you require an employee to provide documentation of the need for ESST leave? So yes, but you've got to wait until it's more than 3 consecutive days. So on the 4th day, and let's say your employee maybe they had this, they had the flu or something, but they did not go to the doctor, and they were just home miserable for 3 days. On the 4th day, you ask them for documentation, and they've not gone to see a physician because it's the flu, and don't make other people sick, and they're just going to tell you to go home and rest and drink fluids anyway. So in that event, Minnesota's ESST law says that an employee can provide their own documentation that the usage of ESST leave was for a qualifying purpose. I mean, there's nothing we can do about these things. This is what we're working with. This is the status of the law. Now, people get really up in arms about this. They're like, so an employee can just, it's like signing your parents' name in school, right? For your tardy. Yeah, essentially the employee can write their own documentation. I know it's annoying, but employees only get a certain amount of sick time in a year. So if they've used 3 days to just sit on a beach somewhere, I mean, there's not really a lot that you can do about it. Of course, if you know and you find out they've not used it for a qualifying purpose, that can be dealt with, but it is a little challenging for employers. So, all right, I think this is our last FAQ, and then I don't know if Bill is on. Bill is on, and he's waiting in the wings for your questions about the system. So does an employer's PTO policy meet the requirements of the ESST law if their employees can choose whether to use PTO for vacation, sick and safe time, or both? And so, oh my gosh, the answer here is not the answer that I wanted to include here. So I'm sorry, it was looks like a copy and paste error. But yeah, as long as the employee, and so here, the employee could use all of their PTO for vacation and leave no time for themselves for sick time. And if that's the case, employees, just because you use PTO, they don't have any greater right to ESST time than what any other employee has. So if they have exhausted and taken all of their PTO for vacation, you're not also required to give them an additional 48 hours of sick time on top of their PTO allotment. So that is one question we get frequently as it relates to PTO policies as well. So all right, without further ado, I am gonna stop my sharing. And Bill, I didn't know if you wanted to share your screen and show the system and how to, how to make all of this wonderful law into practice.
Thanks, Janelle. No, to keep it simple and high level is we have the ability in iSolve to to build out the plans and the rules based on the requirements of the rules, based on the advice you receive from our compliance center, and to ensure that you're staying in compliance as far as that goes. It's not going to be automatic. It's not going to drop on the employees through artificial intelligence. It's something where we have to make a concerted effort to build out the plans and attach them to the employees as they need to be. Now, I think I've set up a couple different scenarios here on my screen, right? So in the simplest of forms is I want to have a PTO policy and I want to have an ESST policy whereby I can accrue per hour worked. So we set that up in the system as hours worked, every 30 hours you work. And we can define worked hours based on the client. So they may say, I want this to include these hours. And I want to maybe be generous, include holiday in there or include other things. You can certainly do that if you want to. We define that with the client on an individual basis. The standard ones are your regular, your overtime, your salary, things of that nature. You get paid to work, right? But that's here as far as hours worked. We can then set up also as, how it's going to process. So at the end of the year, that's important, where you take it, then you accrue it, then you carry it over. That maximizes carryover for the employee also, as far as that goes at year end. But as we build out the rates on that, really is for every 30 hours worked, you get 1 hour. Okay, you accrue 1 hour. We've set up a balance limit of 80. And like Janelle said, that's not going to really impact you in year one if you're doing the accrual method, because you're not going to reach that. This is for subsequent years. But the year-to-date accrual, we have at 48. So it's going to automatically, if you assign this to an employee, when they work the hours, they work 30, they get an hour, right? They can get a max of 48 in that year. And that's how the simplest version of this is built out. You can also do it if you're doing the dump, right? So we have the 48-hour dump, we have the 80-hour dump, right? You have an option here. Say, okay, I want to do it on a schedule, an anniversary date or a calendar date here, a dump on it. And all this is going to be is we're going to say, hey, on that date, put 80 hours in to the bucket. You've now met all the requirements of the ESST. It's in the system. If I remember Janelle saying correctly, you don't have to pay this out at year end. You have it, but they can also use it, right? And it stays at an 80-hour limit. Never gets above 80. So next year, it won't go above 80. If they use some of it up, they can build back some, and it'll add back up to that amount to 80 again and dump it in there. You also can set the same thing up on a 48 if you wanted to here also and have those rules. But with all these, you can also attach a PTO policy to folks. So if you want to have it where you have your regular PTO accrual that's going to start after 90 days, we can set this plan up here to start at 3 months. So if you want to go 0 to 3 months, you're on the accrual, and then you go 3 and on, you start accruing on a regularly scheduled basis. You can do that. We can also set this up to start day one accruing. Instead of waiting 90 days to start accruing, if you want to have a more generous PTO policy to match up with the requirements, we would just take this here and say, okay, it's 0 months of service, start accruing 3.33. Because as part of the rule is, you're going to have to accrue, and Janelle, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but generally speaking, 3.33 is above 2.66, which is 80 hours times 0.0333, which is the accumulator for your ESST time. But we can set up any of these plans on the employer level we want to, then also attach them to the employer level also. So on that employee, you'd say they could have multiple policies on the employee tracking as they're supposed to. And if I went down in payroll to pay Shane on this particular payroll, and I put in, let's say, put in 60 hours just for equal time here, I put in 60 hours on Shane, my expectation is I'm going to get a full hour or 2 hours now of ESST time on the employee record. They're now working towards their balance and their 48 hours in the year. And I guess the last important part is here also is you want to show this on your pay stubs now. In the past, you had accrual policies and you did accruals and balances and things like that, and you really didn't show them on your plans necessarily. Now is the effort and the law by nature is you got to display this on the check, so you just don't block it anymore. But once again, the system is poised and ready to build it out. We have clients using multiple different levels of this and different iterations of it to make it work on behalf to match up with the law.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. That was very helpful and nice to see the system. It looks very intuitive, so that's great. We did have one more question come in while Bill was talking here, and it says, I just want to make sure I am crystal clear. Can one group of employees exempt administrators receive 80 hours front loaded and another group accrue non-exempt staff? So again, the answer to that, yes, you can set up different accrual methods and ways to do this, as long as it doesn't create a disparate impact on folks due to protected class status. Let's see. This may be a question, you know, Bill, I don't know. You can tell me if yes or no, but it says, what if the employer's pay system does not allow them to put ESST on the pay stub, but they have another platform that tracks PTO, ESST in another place that the employee has access to every day online?
That's a great question. I can't answer. I mean, I'm expecting if you have an ESS option available, employees can go into their own data and look at it anytime they want to. I'm not a lawyer, Janelle, so that's where you got to come in here on that one. As you're providing it to them.
Are you familiar? I guess I am surprised to hear that there's a pay system that doesn't allow you to put that on the pay stub, since that is a legal requirement. I've not heard of that, and I'm not familiar with the other platforms.
And I'm not familiar with that particular role either.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, and it looks like, no, it has to be the earnings statement, so it can't just be online. So, okay. All right, looks like maybe a couple more questions came in through. Oh no, I got those. Let's see. I just want to make sure I get all of your questions answered. All right, well, I don't see any more questions at this point. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. We really appreciate it. And if you have questions about the legal side, the HR side, feel free to reach out to us anytime. If you have questions about the platform, the software, please reach out to the folks at Asset HR. I know they'll be happy to help walk you through setting everything up and making sure that whatever you've selected on your end is in compliance. I see one thing here that snuck in. Would we be allowed to pay out accrued time off after termination for full-time employees and not for part-time employees? Again, so you're not required to pay out any ESST, but if you opt to pay it out, I mean, I think you could pay it out to full-time employees and not part-time employees. But again, you're going to need to look at who are your part-time employees versus your full-time employees. Is there a disparate impact? It's always going to, whether you can do things differently for different employees is always going to come down to what impact is it going to have? Is it going to be discriminatory? So that is a little bit of a question mark, but yeah, technically you should be able to do that. So, all right, well, that is everything we've got. We'll make sure to get the slides out to everybody, and I hope everybody has a great afternoon.